Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to understanding some of the really complex forces shaping our world.
And today, we're jumping into something absolutely critical for global security.
Exactly. It often flies surprisingly under the radar, I think. The role of missiles in the Middle East.
It's central.
It really is. You might be surprised, actually. Dennis Gormley estimated back in 2017 that over 90%, not 0% of all missiles used in conflict since World War II were right there in the Middle East.
That's just an astonishing figure, isn't it? It really puts the intensity of the region into focus.
For sure.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to unpack this really intricate, constantly shifting landscape of ballistic and cruise missiles across the Middle East.
We'll look at the trends, the capabilities of the key player states, but also, crucially, non-state actors now, too.
Right. And then we'll get into the incredibly challenging options for arms control.
And just to focus things a bit, we're mainly talking about missiles with ranges over 250 kilometers.
Yeah, the ones that can hit across borders. That signifies a pretty major technical capability.
Think of this as your guide, your shortcut to understanding this vital, often overlooked piece of global security. We've dug up some surprising facts, some key insights.
Insights into how these weapons are fundamentally reshaping regional stability, international relations, all of it.
So let's start with the landscape itself. Who are the key players?
Well, looking at state actors first, there are, believe it or not, 11 Middle Eastern states that possess ballistic or cruise missiles today.
11. Wow.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that, a few have developed pretty significant indigenous design capabilities, the vast majority. They still rely heavily on imports.
Imports and outside help for operation maintenance, that kind of thing.
Exactly, for keeping these sophisticated systems running.
And when you think indigenous capability, advanced capability, Israel immediately springs to mind. Their missile development goes way back, right, to the 60s.
All the way back. Started with French assistance, actually. And that decades-long commitment, starting with that early help, it's really shaped their whole strategic posture today.
How so? Can you give us some examples?
Well, the Jericho series is probably the prime example. The Jericho 1 short range, it was already deployed way back in 1973.
Okay.
Then came Jericho 2, that's a medium-range ballistic missile and MRBM. Likely range around 1,800 kilometers, give or take.
So that reaches deep into Iran.
About half of Iran, yeah, including Tehran. Carries about 1,000-kilogram payload.
And there's a Jericho 3.
There is. Even longer range. Estimated maybe up to 4,000 kilometers with a slightly smaller warhead, maybe 750 kilos. It's reportedly based on their Shavit space launch vehicle.
Ah, the dual-use connection.
Exactly.
Right.
And that puts all of Iran in reach, potentially even places like Pakistan.
I remember reading something fascinating, maybe you can confirm,
Yeah.
about their cruise missiles. Was it the U.S. refusing to sell them Tomahawks back in 2000?
That's the story, yeah.
Did that actually push them to develop their own, like the Delilah and Popeye series, kind of a necessity is the mother of invention situation?
That seems absolutely right. That perceived gap, that limitation, it really appears to have spurred major indigenous development, reinforced that drive for self-sufficiency.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift to Iran. Very different strategic picture there, right?
Very different. For Iran, missiles are really emphasized as a military equalizer and also for prestige deterrence.
Why the emphasis on missiles specifically?
Well, largely because UN sanctions historically really limited their ability to develop and modernize their air force, so missiles fill that critical gap.
And their inventory has grown massively as a result.
Hugely diversified, beyond just, listing names like Shahab 3, Ghadar 1, Imad.
What's the strategy behind having so many different types, like the Khorramshahr, the Fateh series, Zulfiqar, Dezful?
It's about having options, covering different ranges, improving accuracy. The Shahab 3 was foundational, a real leap for them in medium-range capability. But systems like Imad, and especially the Fateh series like Zulfiqar and Dezful, these are increasingly accurate, solid propellant missiles, much harder to counter.
And they haven't just built everything themselves, have they? There's that story about the Kh-55s.
Right. That's a key part of their story. The covert acquisition of 6 old Soviet-designed Kh-55 cruise missiles from Ukraine back in 2001.
That wasn't just a one-off buy, was it?
No, not at all. It wasn't just about having those 6 missiles. It seems it provided a crucial technological basis for their own cruise missile development efforts. Things like the Meshkat, Sumar, and Hoveza programs.
Even though they apparently had engine problems.
Yeah, engine development remained a challenge, but that initial technology was key. And more recently, they've developed the 351, or Quads, cruise missile, which we've seen used.
Okay, so beyond Israel and Iran, who are the other major state players, Egypt comes to mind.
Egypt has legacy systems, yeah. Old Soviet Scud missiles, some French-supplied air-launched cruise missiles, ALCMs,
And the GCC states? Saudi Arabia, UAE.
right, the Gulf Cooperation Council.
Hmm.
Saudi Arabia is significant. They operate Chinese ballistic missiles, the DF-3, and the more modern DF-21.
And aren't they building their own production facility?
There's compelling evidence, yes, that they're constructing a domestic solid-fuel missile production site. Plus, they have the advanced British-French Storm Shadow, or SGLP air-launched cruise missile.
And others in the GCC, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE.
They also have missile capabilities, various systems, often from China or Western suppliers. The UAE is notably active in trying to build its own domestic defense industry, including missiles.
But it's not all growth, is it? Civil wars have taken a toll.
Absolutely. Tragically so.
Hmm.
The ballistic missile arsenals of Syria and Yemen, for instance, have been significantly eroded. Extensive use, lack of maintenance during these brutal civil wars.
Which, speaking of Yemen, brings us to maybe one of the most surprising developments.
The rise of non-state actors.
Exactly. This is a huge shift, isn't it? States aren't the only ones playing this game anymore.
Not by a long shot.
How have groups with, comparatively limited resources managed to get these kinds of capabilities? Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles?
It's a mix of things.
Mhm.
Often they lack significant air power or naval forces. So missiles become a cost-effective way to project power, to target military forces, cities, critical infrastructure.
And they're getting quite sophisticated.
Remarkably so. They've even shown they can reassemble missiles that were perhaps shipped in pieces, often with, shall we say, external help and mentorship.
Hezbollah in Lebanon seems like the prime example here. Their arsenal estimates are just mind-boggling, up to 130,000 rockets and missiles.
That's the estimate, yeah. A nearly 9-fold increase since the 2006 Lebanon War.
That's sheer quantity. Could that just overwhelm defenses like Iron Dome?
That's precisely the concern. Volume matters.
Right.
And it's not just dumb rockets anymore. They're improving range and accuracy, like with the Fate 110 system.
Thanks to Iran and maybe tech transfers from Syria?
It seems likely, yes. Links with Iran are crucial. And the Syrian civil war definitely saw technology proliferate, though mass-producing guided missiles is still likely a challenge for them.
Okay, and then the Houthis in Yemen.
Another key example. Their stockpiles are verifiable. They captured Yemeni government Scud and Tochka short-range ballistic missiles early on.
And they're building their own stuff, too.
They are. Impressive domestic manufacturing of UAVs, drones, and rockets. Plus, again, clear evidence of Iranian mentorship and assistance, particularly in reassembling transferred missile components.
And their reach is growing, striking deep into Saudi Arabia.
Undeniably. Those attacks on Riyadh in 2018, and especially the big ones on Saudi Aramco facilities in 2019, those are powerful demonstrations. Really woke people up.
It's just abundantly clear that missiles aren't just a state monopoly anymore.
Not at all.
And speaking of evolution, there's another big shift. Missiles moving beyond just being seen as WMD delivery systems.
Right. Let's talk about cruise missiles and conventional payloads. This is a really striking trend.
How striking.
Okay, get this. The number of states operating conventionally armed land attack cruise missiles, LACMs, it swelled from just 3 globally in 2001
3, okay.
to 23 by 2021.
Wow, that's a huge jump.
It is. And within the Middle East specifically, it went from just 1 state, Israel, to 9 states, plus the Houthis as a non-state actor.
So what makes LACM so attractive suddenly?
Several things. They typically fly low, subsonic speeds, using terrain, hills, valleys to mask their approach. Makes them much harder to detect and intercept.
Oh, survivable.
Much more survivable. Attribution can also sometimes be tricky. And crucially, they offer a very cost-effective way to challenge even sophisticated missile defenses.
I remember reading about the 2003 Iraq War. U.S. Patriot defenses shot down, 9 Iraqi ballistic missiles?
That's right.
But they didn't intercept any of Iraq's 5 relatively crude LACM-0.
Exactly. That illustrates the advantage perfectly. Even older, simpler cruise missiles posed a real problem.
So why the shift away from the WMD association? Historically, missiles were so inaccurate you needed a nuke or chemical warhead to guarantee hitting anything important.
Pretty much, yeah. Their poor accuracy meant they were mainly seen as strategic terror weapons, or WMD carriers. But guidance technology has improved dramatically.
GPS, other systems?
Exactly. Ongoing improvements in guidance and accuracy mean conventionally armed missiles are now common, effective tools. Precision has transformed their utility.
Any examples of this in action?
The Syrian civil war is a clear case study. You saw extensive use of conventionally armed LACMs by, well, almost everyone involved internationally: France, Israel, Russia, the UK, the US. They were using them for precise conventional strikes.
Okay, so offensive capabilities are growing, diversifying, spreading, which inevitably leads to the other side of the coin, the shield.
Hmm.
Missile defense.
It's that classic action-reaction dynamic, isn't it? Offensive programs spur defensive responses.
And nowhere is that clearer than Israel, perhaps. Their defense system is pretty legendary.
It really is. They've developed this incredibly sophisticated, multi-layered air and missile defense architecture, and it really emerged directly as a response to those Iraqi Scud attacks back in the 1991 Gulf War.
And the most famous layer is probably Iron Dome, right? For the short-range stuff.
That's the one everyone knows.
Mhm.
Mobile, all-weather, developed by Rafael and Israel Aerospace Industries. Designed specifically for short-range rockets, artillery shells, mortars, threats in the 4 to 70-kilometer range.
I heard this amazing, possibly apocryphal story that early developers actually used parts from a toy car because of budget or time constraints.
Believe it or not, that story seems to be true. It really speaks to the ingenuity and perhaps the pressure they were under during development.
Incredible. And despite those maybe humble beginnings, it's been effective.
Surprisingly effective, yes. Israel has claimed interception rates around 90% for rockets heading towards populated areas. We saw that in Gaza conflicts in 2012 and again in 2021 against thousands of rockets from Hamas.
When was its first intercept?
April 2011. And it's been constantly used since, including during those large-scale Iranian drone and missile attacks in April 2024.
But militants try to counter it, obviously.
Of course. The main tactics seem to be firing huge volleys, saturation attacks, to try and overwhelm the system's capacity, or sometimes firing rockets deliberately beyond its maximum effective range.
And it's not cheap to run.
Definitely not. About $50 million per battery to procure. And each interception, estimates vary, but maybe $100,000 to $150,000 per shot?
Per Tamir interceptor missile, yeah. That adds up fast.
It does, which is probably why the U.S., despite having its own systems, bought 2 Iron Dome batteries, cost about $373 million to protect deployed forces. One was even sent temporarily to Guam.
Facing potential threats from China, yeah. Okay, so Iron Dome is the lower tier. What else does Israel have?
Moving up, there's David's Sling. That's designed to intercept threats like cruise missiles, but also larger rockets and some shorter-range ballistic missiles, hitting them within the atmosphere endo-atmospherically.
And the top layer, for the big ballistic missiles.
That's the Arrow system, specifically Arrow 3 now. It operates at the highest tier, designed to intercept incoming ballistic missiles way up high, outside the atmosphere exo-atmospherically. It uses a hit-to-kill vehicle, basically slamming into the target in space.
Kinetic kill, yeah. And aren't they working on lasers too? Iron Beam.
They are. Iron Beam is a directed energy laser-based system. Still under development, but reportedly has already seen some initial combat use, potentially a lower cost per shot option down the line.
So Israel has this impressive layered shield. What about the rest of the region? Are others catching up?
There's definitely been an acceleration in missile defense acquisition, especially among the GCC states, driven by threats from Iran and its proxies.
So what are they buying?
Saudi Arabia is getting THA Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense. The UAE and Bahrain have invested heavily in the latest Patriot systems, the Pash-3 variant.
And Iran, do they have defenses?
They do. Iran actually has quite capable air defenses. They have the Russian S-300 system, which is a big deal when they got it, and they've also developed their own indigenous system, the VAR-373, which they claim is comparable or better.
But even with all these advanced systems, the AD, Patriot, Arrow, are there still vulnerabilities? Can these shields be beaten?
Oh, absolutely. Significant challenges remain. We mentioned saturation, overwhelming defenses with sheer numbers. Think about Hezbollah's estimated 100,000-plus rockets. Trying to intercept even a fraction of those at $100 a pop, the economics become punishing.
Right.
Defenses are also increasingly targeted themselves by drones, by sabotage. We've seen reports of Houthi attacks specifically targeting Patriot missile batteries in Saudi Arabia.
And jamming, electronic warfare.
That's another angle.
Right.
Israel claimed Hamas was developing an electronic system specifically to try and jam Iron Dome.
Right.
They said they destroyed a building being used for that purpose.
Yeah.
So it's this constant cat and mouse game. Offense adapts, defense adapts.
Which brings us to the really difficult question. Arms control. Given all this proliferation, this complexity, state actors, non-state actors, what's being done?
Well, that's the troubling part. Right now, there's essentially a vacuum.
No region-wide agreements, no concerted efforts?
Not really. There are no effective region-wide mechanisms specifically designed to control or limit ballistic or cruise missiles.
Yeah.
And there's a real lack of any sustained, comprehensive arms control effort or even a framework that brings all the key players together consistently.
Have there been attempts in the past?
There have. Some limited successes, maybe. The 1979 Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, for example, did include some verifiable military restraints.
Okay.
But bigger efforts have struggled. Remember the ACRS Working Group Arms Control and Regional Security back in the 90s?
Vaguely, yeah. Part of the Madrid peace process.
That's the one. It was a unique forum, brought Israelis and Arabs together, but it ultimately fell apart.
Why? What were the sticking points?
Fundamentally different priorities. Egypt and other Arab states kept focusing on the nuclear issue, on Israel's presumed nuclear capability, pushing for a WMD-free zone.
While Israel wanted to talk about
Conventional weapons, missile proliferation, and confidence-building measures first. They saw the immediate conventional threat as more pressing. Those differing views just couldn't be reconciled.
And more recently, the Middle East WMD free zone idea. That keeps coming up, right?
It does, especially after the 2010 NPT Review Conference. The goal is clear: a zone free of all WMDs and their delivery systems, which explicitly includes missiles.
But progress seems stalled there, too.
Very much so. Conferences were held in 2013, 2014, but they couldn't even agree on the basic rules, the modalities. Then the UN General Assembly mandated another conference process starting in 2019.
Did that achieve anything?
It created a forum, which is something, I suppose. But its impact was severely limited from the start because Israel refuses to participate. And the US and UK also raise objections.
So the same old problems persist.
Pretty much. Deep mutual mistrust, a real lack of political will, and these fundamentally divergent ideas about what regional security even looks like and how to get there.
Okay, so despite that challenging history, what are the options on the table now? If someone wanted to tackle missile proliferation, how could they approach it? Experts seem to suggest 3 broad ways.
That's right. 3 main modalities. Option 1 is a country-tailored or targeted approach.
Focusing on just one country, like Iran.
Exactly. Think about proposals to put strict limits specifically on Iran's missile programs, maybe modeled somewhat on the JCPOA nuclear deal structure.
What's the challenge there?
The big challenge is convincing Iran to accept limits on programs they see as vital for their defense and, frankly, national prestige. Missiles have huge strategic and propaganda value for Tehran.
Okay, option 2.
A regional-based approach. This is the idea of a negotiated region-wide solution. You try to get all the key states, Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc., to agree to mutual restraints.
Like limits on missile range, numbers, types, payloads, proliferation controls.
All of that, yes. The WMD free zone proposal implicitly covers delivery systems, remember. But as we just discussed, this approach runs straight into all those historical roadblocks: mistrust, differing priorities.
Makes sense. So option 3.
Option 3 involves international restrictions, basically restraints imposed from the outside by actors outside the region.
How would that work? Through existing international agreements?
Potentially, yes.
Yep.
Things like the Missile Technology Control Regime, the MTCR, which aims to stop the spread of missile tech, or the Hague Code of Conduct, the HTOC, which is more about transparency, states voluntarily sharing info about their missile programs and tests.
Are Middle Eastern countries part of those?
Participation is patchy, unfortunately. Widespread regional buy-in is lacking. But even so, these international norms and regimes can still be useful. They can set standards, maybe inspire some confidence-building measures, even if not everyone joins formally.
So regardless of which path is taken, targeted, regional, or international, there are some core issues any effective control regime has to tackle, right? Some fundamental questions.
Absolutely. Cross-cutting themes. First, you need clear criteria for what you're controlling. Numbers, types, range limits, warhead capacity, the launch platform. It gets complicated fast.
And which activities do you try to control? Just deployment or use? What about development, testing?
Exactly. And critically, transfers and trade, especially preventing transfers to non-state actors, which is a huge driver of instability now.
Then there's the dual-use problem. Space launch vehicles looking a lot like ICBMs.
A classic dilemma. How do you allow legitimate, peaceful space programs while preventing that technology from being diverted to military missile programs? Very tricky.
And as we've stressed, it's not just about WMDs anymore.
Definitely not. Any framework has to go beyond WMDs and address this surge in conventionally armed missiles, precision strike capabilities, and armed drones or UAVs, too. They're blurring the lines.
Plus, the non-state actor challenge. How do you effectively control groups like Hezbollah or the Houthis? They don't sign treaties.
A massive challenge. Requires different tools, maybe focusing on state sponsors, interdicting supplies.
Yeah.
It's tough.
And finally, verification. How do you make sure everyone is sticking to the rules in such a high-stakes, low-trust environment?
Verification and transparency are absolutely essential, but also incredibly difficult. Still, even starting with small steps, maybe limited transparency measures, could be vital for building just a little bit of confidence, a potential stepping stone.
So wrapping this all up, it's clear the Middle East missile landscape is just in constant, rapid flux.
Absolutely. Growing indigenous capabilities in some places, the really dramatic rise of powerful non-state actors, this continued instability between the missile haves and have-nots. It's a dynamic and, frankly, dangerous picture.
And developing some kind of comprehensive arms control agenda, it seems incredibly challenging.
It is undeniably difficult. The history isn't encouraging. But given the stakes, the potential for escalation, the destructiveness of these weapons, the effort has to be redoubled, doesn't it? We need pragmatic, maybe innovative solutions.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Given all that complexity, the past failures, maybe trying to find one single grand solution is the wrong approach.
Perhaps.
Could a multi-pronged strategy, pursuing country-specific limits where possible, pushing for regional dialogue where openings exist, and strengthening international norms all at the same time, could that actually be the most pragmatic way forward?
Even if it feels less direct, less satisfying.
Exactly. Maybe a more adaptive multi-track approach is what's needed to chip away at these evolving missile threats in the Middle East. Definitely something to think about as you follow the news from the region.